Welcome back to Drive Your Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Master Coach Carrie Marshall, and it's time to go after those goals.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.
Welcome back to Drive Your Thoughts Coaching. I'm Master Coach Carrie Marshall, and today I want to talk to you about the Mid Goal Slump. It's a real thing, I promise you. Let me first describe what a Mid Goal Slump is. I coach people usually from about January to December, so I'll coach people for a full year on their goals. And what I see is that about July or August, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but people will start to kind of get frustrated and they'll start to kind of pull back away from their goal based on several different things. And this is called a mid-goal slump. So I wanted to go through a couple of problems that I see my clients go through because I know that there's many of you that are going through this right now. Maybe you set that New Year's resolution, and if you've stuck with it consistently, you may be struggling with it right now. Or what we see a lot is the New Year's resolution has maybe been dropped already, but you might be feeling guilty or you might be thinking that it's a great idea to pick it back up. And so I want to talk really about that mid-goal slump and what we can do about it. So why does a mid-goal slump happen? I want to kind of walk through how we set goals and what the process is so that we can really start to understand what's happening with goals. So when we start a goal in the beginning, what we do is we get really excited about possibility. We have a desire for something, and there's something in us that goes from a desire to actually thinking that it could happen. So we start to make the plan. We'll plan it out. We'll really think about successes. And so then we'll create this amazing plan. But what we always forget to include when we create plans is we forget to include two different types of things. Number one is we forget to talk about obstacles. And so we forget to actually include that it is going to be difficult or that we are going to face challenges throughout the time that we're trying to face the goal. The second thing that we don't do is we don't create a disaster plan. Now, a disaster plan is when everything goes wrong. Somebody ends up in the hospital. We can't get to a certain place. Our business explodes or drops or declines. Something tragic happens in our family. We never create disaster plans for those goals. And so those are the two things that I see people miss out on. So what happens when we start goals is we're excited. We really want to create something amazing. We have the motivation, we have the drive and desire that are all coming together to create a space where we show up in this amazing way for a week, a month, a quarter. And then life starts to happen. We start to get involved in other things. Like I said, unexpected things happen in our life and we start to drop down from the goal. Another thing that I see happen is that we also might be all in on the goal, but then we start to fail. And so then by about July, like I said, if we're starting in January, it's about 2 quarters in, 6 months in, what I like to see is that we actually start to see that the slump starts to happen for several reasons. Now, this is where I like to say that we are either going to figure out who we are and create someone that we can actually believe in and that we have really a lot of confidence in, or we kind of slump away, which is why it's called the mid-goal slump. We slump away and then we never trust ourselves to really go after those big goals again. Or we get in a pattern of showing up for that first quarter, the second quarter, and never accomplishing. So we'll get a little bit in, but not all the way, and never to fully accomplished. So let's talk about the mid-goal slump and how we can avoid getting to that place where we're actually slumping away and completely discarding or ignoring the goal. So I want to talk to you about these specific problems that I see and what we can do about each of them. So the first problem that I see is that clients will come to me in January. Let's use a business goal or a money goal. And they'll say, I want to make $1 million in my business. Well, by July, they haven't met $500,000. And they'll say, I'm not tracking. And so that's the problem. They're not tracking perfectly. So from quarter to quarter, it's not making sense. Statistics are amazing and I love numbers, but what I want to offer for everybody is oftentimes with goals, it's not going to track perfectly quarter to quarter or month over month. You have to be willing to believe that there are going to be times in your business that are absolutely going to skyrocket and times in your business that it's going to slump away. This goes for any type of goal that we're going after that we can track like this. Weight loss, money, things like that. You're going to notice that it will not track exactly month over month. Now, this isn't a problem until you make it a problem. We really want to watch numbers, and numbers are very important, especially when we're tracking goals. And so if we get to quarter one and we only have 50,000, is it going to track to 1 million? Probability wise, probably not, but we have to remember that there's always that inkling of a new offer, a new product, something else coming into the wings, new clients that maybe we didn't think that we would get, maybe we get exposed to a new audience. And so absolutely there's possibility there, but we don't want to get bogged down by the numbers and give up on ourselves because we're not tracking perfectly month over month. I can't tell you the amount of clients that I've had that have had a really terrible July or summer that then when we get to a different spot, they absolutely explode in the fall. One client in particular comes to mind, and what was happening with her new business is she actually had 0 clients show up for July. She wasn't expecting that. And as a single mom, she really was dependent on that income. She had just left a very, very stable job. And so in July, it felt like disaster was striking. She felt like nothing was going right. She felt like she wasn't going to be able to afford those things that her kids were depending on her. But what we wanted to be able to see is the tracking. And so she told herself, I might have to close my business because it's not tracking. But what we wanted to really look at was not the tracking of July, but we really wanted to look at forecasting for the future and what the future was going to look like. Turns out that in her industry, July actually goes dead. She didn't know that before. It was her very first summer doing this business, and she hadn't seen that coming. And so now on the back end of it, now she prepares for July. But in that moment, she had the opportunity to slump away, go back to her job, or she could really kind of invest again her time and her energy in making sure that August and September were going to be phenomenal. And that's exactly what she did. So when we're looking at the numbers, that first problem is it's not tracking. And what I want to offer as the solution is really making sure that you're looking at forecasting for the future, like we've talked about before on the podcast, and really coming back to yourself and saying, okay, what do I have in the pipeline that's going to make sense for this? And if the numbers aren't tracking, then we need to do that checkpoint of adjusting and adapting the goal, making a new offer, finding new people to talk to so that we can really up those numbers in the rest of the quarter and the rest of the year. I know that numbers aren't always going to track. And so when my clients come to me freaking out about the numbers, I have that belief, absolutely 100%, that you can have the most phenomenal end of year and make that money, lose the weight, whatever that goal is. So remember, your numbers aren't necessarily going to track perfectly. So the next problem that I see is that people start to believe that they don't know what else to do. Like I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes in the beginning of the year, we come hot and heavy with that goal. We're ready to do all of the things. And then by July, we kind of run out of things to do. We think, I don't know what else to do. I've tried this and this. Maybe one was really successful. Maybe one failed. But we start to actually lose momentum and lose ideas. How do we lose ideas? That's so crazy. Well, what is happening is your mindset is shifting. Your mindset is stale. You haven't gone back and remembered why you're doing this and why it's important to you. Because if you can remember your why and the drive of why you want what you want, it is going to help you to remember to come up with these ideas. Another tip that I want to give you is if you're running out of ideas, you need to go back to connections and people. If you can get around the right people, you are absolutely going to start to get ideas again about the next thing to do for your goal. So often we do goals personally and we do it as a solo person. And so our brain is used to going through the same neural pathways over and over again. And so what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to get out of that slump and we want to come back, go around different people, get different connections, put yourself in different situations so that you can start to see that there's those different neural pathways that can kind of start to fire of, oh, I never thought about that. That's one reason why having a coach is so important. When my clients come and they say, I've run out of ideas, instantly I can come up with about 20 ideas for them. And I'm like, have you tried this or this or this? And they're like, I've never thought about that before. And that's really fun because then they think about it and we can put it into their context and they can come up with their actionable items. But that's why you want to be surrounding yourself by connections and great people because they're going to help you also see those connections. The other thing that I see with that is that when we say, I don't know how, there's actually something else that's going on, or I've tried everything. It's that you have a belief about the failures that are happening. And this is the next problem that I see, is that at this point, you should have a lot of failures chalked up to your goal. If you only have 1 to 2 failures in July around these big goals that you're going after, I want to tell you that you are not hitting your goal aggressively enough. You should have several goals every single quarter and not small goals. Not, I talked to so-and-so and they said no. I want you to say, I went and asked to be on this huge TV network. I did this, I did that. You should have you should have 2 to 3 very big fails with a lot of little fails, about a dozen fails a quarter. So I want to say that again because it's so important. You should have at least 3 big fails. I like to see at least 5 in a quarter. And you should have at least 12 small fails in a quarter if you are aggressively and intentionally going after your goals. So if you're doing this correctly, by July, you should have 10 big fails and 24 small fails. That's a lot of failure that is coming your way during a goal. And so that is another thing that I see, and a problem that I see is that when people forget that failure is feedback and that failure doesn't mean anything about you, that you're failing your way to success, that your ability to be resilient and to show up and to be not great at it, but to get feedback is your superpower. If you're not telling yourself that, you are absolutely going to get exhausted from the failure that you've been through for the first part of the year. You're going to start to doubt yourself. You're going to start to pull back. You're going to start to wonder if it's worth it. And so that's the next thing that I see happen with people, is that they are getting to the space of exhaustion with failure. Now, failing is not an actual feeling. Failing is a circumstance. And there's a really great reason that we need to know the difference between the two. Because if I see that failing is a feeling and I say, well, I failed, it's not a feeling. You get to feel however you want to about failure. Now, this is a really dumb example, but I'm going to use it because it actually is important to see the process. I am always constantly doing things that I'm not good at, things that I've never done before, and I do it on purpose. So for an example, I was with my sister this past week and we were at an Airbnb out of town, and she brought her knitting needles and her yarn. And so I said, hey, I'd love to learn how to knit. She's like, great, I'll teach you. Well, I learned how to knit a line. There's something called knitting and purling. I just learned this. I'm very proud of myself for that. But I wanted to knit a project. I just didn't want to make this big, long line of knit. And so what I wanted to do was actually make a project. And so I knew, number one, I'm not going to be good at this. Number two, I'm going to make mistakes. Now, I'm not intentionally trying to make a mistake, but I'm just allowing myself the acceptance that mistakes are going to happen. And then the third thing is I'm going to tell myself great things along the way. And that's one of the most important parts about failing, is that it's how you're talking to yourself that matters. What are you saying to yourself as you're failing? And so as I'm knitting and learning how to do this project, they're like these little slippers. I'm telling myself, I'm really proud that I'm doing this. This is fun. I'm learning something new. This is challenging. But I'm always telling myself amazing things. Now, I get about halfway done with the project, which took my sister about an hour to complete. I'm 3 hours into this project and I'm only halfway done. Now, I look over and I show my sister and I'm like, look how good I'm doing. And she looks at it and she's like, not that great because you've missed this and this and this. And she shows me 3 mistakes that I've made throughout the project. Now, for anyone that's listening that's a knitter, you know what that means. What you have to do is you actually have to completely take apart the entire project, or you can take it apart to the mess that you've made and kind of adjust it from there. But I'd made so many mistakes along the way that I actually had to take the entire project apart. Now, here's the process. I made a mistake. I see where it's at. I adjust and adapt. I take my sister's feedback, and then I'm okay to go back and make the mistake again and again, as long as I'm learning throughout the process. And so when we're talking about failing along the way, I want you to make sure that you're looking and checking into how you've been talking to yourself about that failure. What have you been saying to yourself about the failure as you've been going after your goal? Have you got frustrated with yourself because you made the same mistake over and over again? Have you learned anything from the mistake? Have you documented along the way what you've been learning? And so if the problem comes up that you have had all of these failures up to this point and you're exhausted from it, that's a mindset shift that needs to happen. You need to be able to see that that failure is your feedback, and that if you can adjust and adapt quickly, that you are absolutely going to be better the next time. So I make this project. The first time, it doesn't look that great. I could have finished it, honestly. Could have been like, it's a throwaway, it doesn't matter. But I want it to look as good as my sister's. And so I took that thing apart, I think 3 different times. Not just small mistakes. Big mistakes were being made, but every single time I learned something new. I learned a new stitch. I learned how to, I'm not going to say this, I'm going to butcher it, but like slip knit. I learned how to purl and then turn and then do a stitch. I learned all of these different techniques along the way. And every single time I'd tell myself, this time my job is to make sure that I knit the exact same amount that I needed to, or put a marker in so that I know exactly where I need to. Every time failure was feedback. So if you're stuck feeling exhausted from your failure, we need to adjust how you're looking at your failure. The last thing that I want to mention as we talk about this mid-goal slump is I want to talk about the problem that comes up, and it is that you're telling yourself that the goal just isn't important anymore. Life happens. We all get busy. We all have things, like I mentioned at the very beginning, of things happening in your life where you're thinking to yourself, like, I just can't do this anymore. If you are struggling to see that your goal is not important anymore, I really want you to look once again at why you started the goal in the first place. Your why for goals is going to change throughout the process. At first, you're going to tell yourself that you want to make $1 million because you want to have a bigger house, or you want to do this. But as you go after the goal, the why is going to change. You need to check in with that constantly, because if you're not checking in with the why, then when those things come up in your life, you're going to see that it's going to be very easy to drop that goal really quickly. We've had some pretty big things happen in our lives, and I've absolutely dropped goals and never come back to them. Have anybody else done that? But I'll tell you, it never feels good to drop a goal and never go back to it. Yes, you may need to pause a goal, but pausing feels so much better, or starting over. I know that some of you have goals that are maybe a challenge, like reading so many days a year or something, or consecutively reading over 100 days. You may need to start at day 1 again. But what I want to tell you is that that's okay. It's okay to start at day 1 again, but I want you to always come back to why before you drop the goal. come back and ask yourself, is it worth it to drop this, or can I make the time to do the bare minimum? And that's what's important if we have found that life has gotten in the way. And that's why we talk about that disaster plan in the beginning. You need to make sure that when we're talking about your goals, that you're, number one, setting up obstacles. So not only think about all the amazing things and the tasks that you need to do, but tell yourself, what could be problematic as I go after this goal? Where are the obstacles going to hit me, and what can I do about them? And then the second thing is the disaster plan. A disaster plan essentially is just where we're going to go in and we're going to say, if the very worst happens in my life or something really similar to that, where is the bare minimum that I can show up for this goal? This is how I built my business, through going through some things in my own life. Now, it wasn't the worst thing that could happen, but there were challenges that were going on. But I knew that there were going to be days that I would just have to hit the bare minimum. And that is where we want to make sure that we're showing up for ourselves, is that we don't want to tell ourselves that we didn't do it or that we're terrible for not going all in. You are going to have days that disaster plan is going to need to come into play. And that's great. You need to be able to allow yourself to do that. And as long as you can stick to the disaster plan, that bare minimum, you're going to see that you're going to come out of that slump, and that you're going to feel really grateful for your past self for setting up a disaster plan, because it's going to make such a difference. I hope that this has been helpful. And I hope that if you find that you're in that goal slump right now, that you can, number one, identify the problem, and then number two, find the solution really quickly. If you need help with this, you can always come over to Instagram at Drive Your Thoughts Coaching, and I would love to help you. Tell me what the slump is, tell me where the problem is, and you and I can come together and find that solution. We'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If you're ready to get in the driver's seat of your own life, you can come and follow me at Drive Your Thoughts Coaching on Instagram, or come and see more ways to work with me at driveyourthoughts.com.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.